Thank you to you all for joining in today on our conversation about PhD career pathways. I'm excited. We've got a mix of folks with different degree paths with those PhDs. And here on the call, we have a couple who are in industry and a couple who are in academia. And so I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from them and to hear their career paths and some of what they've experienced and some of their choices along the way, and then make sure that you students have plenty of time to ask them questions as well. So with that, I'm just going to let each of our fabulous panelists introduce themselves. And in that, if y'all can talk just a little bit about that pathway that you took and maybe talk about some of those decision points that helped you get to where you are now. And then we'll open it up to questions. So Suzanne, you were here first. How about we start with you?
Yeah, so it dawned on me as I was getting ready for this panel that I actually graduated from UT with a bachelor's in EE 20 years ago, which is bananas, when Trisha was head of the scholarship office for engineering. So following UT, I was really deciding hard between law school and grad school, which may sound like a crazy choice, and I'm happy to say more about that. But PhD school is free. Definitely ask follow-up questions if that's new to you. So I decided let's do that first, and if it's terrible, we can pivot. So I moved to California, did my graduate work at Stanford, also in electrical engineering, and I graduated in 2008, and the plan all along had been hopefully to go into academia. Women were, and I imagine still are, very underrepresented in electrical engineering from the beginning at UT. And so it kind of occurred to me that, wow, if I can do this, which I was never sure of, I probably should, and I probably should, try and make it easier for others as well. And I was never really sure that I fit or I belonged, but they kept not kicking me out, so I kept proceeding forward. And all through my PhD, I had been collaborating with industry partners on my research, and so I felt like I could try academia, and then if it sucked, flip back to industry, basically. And the decision I had to make was, I guess, one a lot of women had to make, which is that my husband had graduated with his PhD in chemical engineering 2 years ahead of me. And so he found a job also in the Bay Area. And my basic dilemma was, I kind of wanted to be at an undergraduate institution, but the pay was so bad, I couldn't really justify moving him somewhere else for that kind of job. So I was looking at either a teaching school locally to the Bay Area or a research university anywhere, because he did have some flexibility to move, or possibly industry. And I ended up at Sonoma State University, which is Bay Area-ish. It's a campus of the Cal State system, and it is a mostly undergraduate institution. And I ended up, I guess, working with a population in a setting that is really fulfilling for me and really what I wanted. The pay definitely did suck, especially at first, but I stuck with it. I consulted in industry the whole time, and I'm a full professor, just coming off a term as department chair on sabbatical this year, which was a great year to sit out, it turns out. And I'm happy to answer questions especially about being at the kind of institution I'm at. You don't necessarily get exposed to it in your PhD process because it's not a PhD granting institution. You're not going to see us necessarily at research conferences. So for anybody who's interested maybe in that kind of career, I'm super happy to answer your questions, and also your questions about working with industry in academia and staying portable.
Awesome. Thanks, Suzanne. Stephanie.
Hi. So I kind of had some of the same aha moments about PhD being free. So I came from a background, neither of my parents or my husband's parents had college degrees. So, and the thought of spending that much time in college before you finally got to work, I have to say I was very not interested, but I co-opted as an undergrad. I needed money, so I co-opted. That turned out to be a really good decision, because when you go for your PhD, a lot fewer people will have had that much work experience as an undergrad before they go to their PhD. So that helped with the PhD applications. The boss I had at work strongly encouraged me to go to grad school. Several of my professors did. And so off to grad school I went. I was, wise enough to know I wasn't wise enough. And so I was willing to take that level of input, because to me, the thought of going to grad school was just nothing I would ever want to do. I co-op both at IBM and TI as an undergrad. I was lucky enough that I was able to move my last co-op from between undergrad and grad to our R&D organization, so that I could get exposure to R&D in an R&D organization before I went to grad school. That at least made it a little bit more attractive, because the only PhDs I had really known, if I had not been a co-op student, would have been my professors. And I didn't see myself being a professor. And so once I learned that grad school was free, so just like Suzanne, why not? It's free, try it out. You could stop the master's level, you could keep right on going. And so that became very attractive. So I did my PhD at UT. So my undergrad is Oklahoma State, graduate is UT. You can imagine who I root against. And my husband's the same. So my husband's electrical engineering, I'm in chemical. And so went to grad school. And you all of a sudden understood you could spend more time focusing on your topics. I did pick the topics I wanted to focus on in grad school based on undergraduate co-op. So that's another reason to do something like a co-op or an extensive amount of undergraduate work, is because when you go to grad school, your PhD in general won't look exactly like what you're going to do when you go to work, but it will usually be related. So whatever topic you pick, you want to pick one that you can spend at least the next 10 years in and not regret that choice. And so for me, I was a little bit unusual in that I already had a strong opinion about what I wanted to do in grad school based on the work. So when I went to graduate school, I was very much focused on, I wanted to do process control, I wanted to do reactor modeling, I wanted to do statistics. I knew both. I also, all through undergrad, I worked for a professor. So again, the things I did as an undergrad, I did for money. So I wasn't doing the undergraduate to get research experience. I needed cash. And I was very active in Society of Women Engineers. And luckily that advisor right away, I was going to go apply to a grocery store, because that again was all I knew. Luckily the SWE advisor said, no, you go ask the department chair. He'll help you link into professors. It's much better to work for a professor. It's more money. That was a very good decision. So between my undergraduate, which turned out to be what you would now call undergraduate research, and my co-op, I knew what I wanted to focus on. And I knew that I wasn't interested in the math per se behind control and reactor, but rather once you had that math, what you could do with it. So what you would now think of systems think or design theory, it has different names now. I already knew that was what I wanted to be doing because of that exposure. So in graduate school, that's what I focused on. And when I graduated, I did have universities reach out to me. I was very involved with different organizations as a graduate student. So you do this a lot as an undergrad. And I've noticed at the graduate level, a lot of students will quit being involved with organizations. I would say, if anything, in graduate school, up your involvement in organizations, because that's where you will find your contacts for your jobs. So I did have the opportunities, but both my husband and I decided we didn't want to be professors. And so we went to work and both of us started with post-PhD jobs being very related to our PhDs. For me, what has happened a couple of times, and I've talked before at a WIP session, is regardless of what you pick, if you are in the field long enough, whatever you pick will no longer be the big topic. And there's a chance your company may split, your company may outsource, your company may quit manufacturing that particular thing. That's going to happen to you. So it's all about a mindset of being able to take the skills you have and where you might apply them next, as well as having contacts that are willing to go there. So I now am in an area called power electronics, or specifically switch mode power electronics. So Suzanne, since she's an electrical engineer, may understand this. That field did not exist. Switch mode was a very small field, done in a very different way, and not with semiconductors like we do today, when I was an undergrad. So even if I'd been an electrical engineer, I couldn't have been a specialist in this topic area. So with time, I moved into that particular topic area. So I transitioned many times in my career, and the current one, most of my peers are are electrical engineers. So everybody I deal with on a regular basis is an electrical engineer. Because my undergrad and PhD both were heavy with process control, and my PhD was heavy with plasma physics and the control of a plasma, a lot of the background you would have, I got in, even though I was as a Kimmy. So along the way though, you'll have to continue to learn. I take a lot of classes. I continue to take classes, including technical classes. And even if I was still a chemical engineer, I would, by day trade, I would still be doing that, because the topic you're in now, 30 years from now, it won't be the topic. And 30 years seems like a long time, but if you're 20 now, 30 years from now, you're only 50. The average lifespan is about 80, right? So you've got many years ahead of you. And so about every 10 years, I have switched fields, and I have not done so because I sat down and said, that's the field I want to go to. It was more like the field I was in was obviously disappearing. And so I needed to be getting into the next field before the one I was in completely went away.
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, they're going to have a lot of questions for you all. Marissa, let's hear from you.
I'm Marissa Wechsler. I graduated with my bachelor's in biomedical engineering from the University of Texas at San Antonio. Born and raised in San Antonio, I'm a first-generation college student as well. And first person to ever even think about a STEM field in my family. I was good at math and science in high school. My parents said, you should be an engineer. I had no idea what that was. We had a neighbor that was a mechanical engineer. He said, mechanical engineering is a great broad field. I said, okay, I will do mechanical engineering. I will live at home, and that's what I will do. But I had always been fascinated with applications to the body. In high school, I took anatomy and physiology, and I knew I didn't want to be a medical doctor. But application of things to the body was very exciting to me. So when I was at UTSA my freshman year, I also needed a job, and I thought I was going to work at the grocery store as well, because that's what I knew. But I saw a flyer for the opportunity to do undergraduate research, get paid for it. So I needed a job, but I also thought, wow, I could get paid to apply what I was learning in the classroom or do something more hands-on. Although I would be happy working at the grocery store, I think applying a little bit more of my knowledge and learning as I was going and getting paid for it was really exciting to me. So I applied to that program and was accepted. And then the lab that I joined was in biomedical engineering, although I was a mechanical engineering major. And my first year, my advisor, the professor I worked for, she has been, she's had a huge impact on my career. And so she took me under her wing, and I just joined her lab because I interviewed her for a project I was doing, and I told her I was applying to this research program, and she said, oh, if you're accepted, come back to my lab. And that's pretty much what happened. But I did not know she was one of the first females to actually enter the field of chemical engineering and biomedical engineering. And she has been a champion for females in engineering for so long. And I did not know any of these things. I didn't know how established she was in the field. I did not know. I just thought, oh, she told me to join her lab. So I joined her lab. Anyway, the rest is history. She's been a champion for me. She, again, has kept me under her wing. She held my hand at conferences and was like, meet so-and-so, meet so-and-so, meet so-and-so. And I think through her mentorship, she showed me the opportunity for a career in research. And so after I graduated, I did my PhD in biomedical engineering at UT Austin, and I graduated in 2019. And now I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So when I was finishing my PhD, I was recruited to go back to San Antonio, with the main point being that they did not have role models who were female engineers who were also minority students. UTSA is a Hispanic serving institution, and so having those role models for students is extremely important. And even when I was finishing my PhD, I knew I had taken a course in the pharmacy department, and I knew that if I was going into industry, I would want to do something in data science, and that area was really fascinating to me. However, when thinking about that opportunity, I thought that I would lose the opportunity to mentor undergraduate students. And when I was doing my PhD, that was extremely important to me, was mentoring undergraduate students. And if I did not have that opportunity in my career, I don't think I would be fulfilled in my job. And so I knew that I basically had to have that. And so having that opportunity at a Hispanic serving institution specifically was really important to me, in an area where I felt that I could have the largest impact. So I just started at UTSA in January, and so I'm very much still transitioning. I did my postdoc last year, so half of it was COVID related and the other half was extremely fast paced and trying to get things out before I was going to start my position. So very much in a transition, but happy to share any experiences and to answer any questions you all may have.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. Alyson.
Hello, I'm Alyson Freeman, and my undergraduate degree is in chemical engineering and then master's and PhD in materials science and engineering. And I think, like a lot of the previous panelists, I didn't necessarily go to grad school on purpose. It was just every step of the way, it seemed like the better of the decisions. I wasn't ready to be a real adult and have a real job. I wanted to stay in college, I think, a little bit longer. And same thing, it was free. I figured I'll at least get my master's and then decide what I want to do from there. I went to the University of Florida. I joke that I stayed for the really, really good football years because it was right after I graduated from undergrad. And that's when Tim Tebow was there. We won national championships and stuff. And it was fun. It was fun to stay in college for a little bit longer. And then in grad school, while working on my PhD research, I ended up doing most of my work at Los Alamos National Laboratory and not on campus, so in New Mexico instead of in Florida. And that was good because it was real world job experience and it was working towards my degree, and a little bit more money too to work at a national lab than a university. It's still grad student pay, but it was very exciting at the time. And what I worked on there was around, they do like nuclear national security stuff, but the background behind it was the same process for making semiconductors. And that's the part that my PhD was in and my focus area. And then while I was at Los Alamos, I met the person that's now my husband. And I had to decide between research at a national lab or going into industry. And there was a big problem because he had just gotten security clearances and he wanted to stay at the lab, which is in the middle of nowhere. So I just took kind of the only other job available, which was at Intel. And it was 2 hours away. Actually, we had to commute, like we lived in the middle and each commute 1 hour opposite directions for a little while. But getting that experience of national lab versus industry was really good. And there's definitely pros and cons to both. I feel like the pace is slower at a national lab. It's very family friendly. One of the good job security as well. It could be hard. Everything depended on finding funding, a lot like in academia. Getting grant money, that type of thing was where you focus your energy. Everything depended on the congressional budgets in October every year. And then I saw the difference where working in industry and how fast-paced it was and less reliable, less family-friendly, but I liked kind of being more on the end of where it's almost going to a user as opposed to the beginning, potentially what could happen type research. They're both exciting in their own way, but I liked being closer to the end user. So I worked there for a little while, and then it turned out we really didn't want to stay in New Mexico. We were looking to move near family, which for him is Austin, Texas. So I transferred to Samsung doing the same thing at Intel for semiconductor manufacturing here, and found that it was so unfamily friendly, it was unsustainable for me. So I went from being a process engineer to being a project manager of process engineering things, then to being a people manager of engineers. And now I'm a people manager of technical people, but not even engineers anymore a lot of times. So I feel like I've really just branched away to the business side. And I didn't know that was where I would end up. But now I'm around people with mostly MBAs that have people skills. And I started in a portable back lab in the middle of nowhere where people are not social at all. So a wide variety there. And now I'm at Dell.
Awesome. Thank you. So lots of different career paths, lots of stumbling maybe a little bit into those PhD programs, taking advantage of that free opportunity to continue that learning, and then figuring out along the way what you enjoy and what you're good at and where you want to be. So students that are on here, and I saw Alyson, you asked the question kind of who's in the mix, and I see a mix of students from the names that are here. We have some undergrads, some who are undergrads who know they're headed to grad school already, some who are grad students in the midst of this trying to figure out what they want to do. So students, what questions do you have? This is your time to ask these fabulous panelists things that you want to learn. And you can,
Tricia, I want to,
yeah.
Let me add something, and that may drive some of the questions, because both Marissa and Suzanne talked about they wanted undergrad exposure. They wanted to mentor the next generation. They wanted to serve the underrepresented population. And the irony is I'm in industry and I massively get that opportunity to do that. And I would not have thought about that as an undergrad. So as an undergrad or even a grad student, I would have said, I have to choose between industry and maybe do like Alyson talked, you get closer to being able to see something in product, but I won't have that opportunity really for mentoring or exposure into the community. And so one of the things, and we can watch everybody's eyebrows if they're on, actually got their cameras on. TI, and Tricia knows this, TI matches dollar for dollar up to $30,000, everything that goes to particular type of nonprofits, which covers almost everything, including even, like the local high school. They also pay for a certain number of volunteer hours. So let's suppose on Saturday, I go down to UT and I serve a WIP program, or I'm doing this right now, right? This hour that I'm doing is win-win. TI wants to have it done for recruiting. On the other hand, TI will quite literally turn around and pay Tricia because I'm sitting here. And so she gets that type of money. I always send her a note and saying, okay, I'm entering you, money's coming your way. So that's one thing, is that the companies want to see that. They also, a lot of the companies focus on the underrepresented population. So if you look at the schools, the STEM K through 12 schools that we're involved with, being in the Dallas area, we have lots of underrepresented populations to choose from. That's where they're going to be. But you also have programs internal to your company to mentor the next generation. So just last year, I started a program that this year is going to be close to about 500 people involved. When you look at the managers, the mentees, and the coaches, this very extensive coaching program that is aimed at early career folks. So if you're looking at, I want to go into academics because that's really the only way that my job includes coaching and mentoring and community outreach. That might have been true, let's say 40 years ago. I think now you have so many different choices. If that's where your personal passion is, definitely if you're going to go industry, look for a company that's part of their personal passion, but you have a lot more opportunities now than you would have previously to integrate your personal passion with the next generation and equality, diversity, and inclusion, and your job for making money.
We could probably spend a whole webinar on dispelling the myths on academia and on industry, and how there oftentimes is so much overlap within them, whether it's, yes, there's bureaucracy in both. Yes, you sometimes have to go find your projects or your funding in both. Yes, sometimes there's the mentoring in both. There's a lot of a lot of overlap. And so that's where that investigation really becomes important. I see you. Would you like to ask a question?
I'm Yushi. I'm like a third-year graduate student and in molecular biology major. So now I'm thinking about my career, especially in industry. So I have a question. So if I want to find a job in industry, do I need to do like internship during my PhD or like after my PhD?
I think having work experience, whether you're going academic or industry, you want to have that. So especially if you didn't have it as undergrad, then you will want to have it in graduate school. Industry work that's related to where you want to go to work. So when I went off to grad school, I didn't co-op at all, but that was because I had over a year and a half of the exact work experience I needed, because my work experience tied directly to my PhD topic. But if you don't have that, then I would intern as a graduate student. Suzanne looked like you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know this is really field dependent. So my research area as a grad student was computer architecture. And so industry is well represented in the research community as well. And so you're meeting industry researchers just at the conferences you're going to present your graduate work anyway. And so there's less of a trade-off if that's the case for you. Like, you don't have to go as far out of your way to make industry contacts and figure out who's hiring, and your advisor can be a great help. I know that sometimes there's tension where maybe you want to intern, but your advisor has other ideas about your summer.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what I want to know. Yeah.
I would put off that conflict to as late as possible. One of the things my advisor said, I was lucky enough to have a fellowship, so I didn't have to TA. And I was like, but I want to go into academia. How can I be sure I have teaching experience? And he was like, hold your horses. If it gets to be you're about to graduate, this is still what you want to do, we'll make sure it happens. And that's kind of the advice I would give you about industry is there's no need to like provoke a conflict with your advisor. Just, sort of keep networking in the community, making connections as best you can. And then if it becomes clear towards the end of your PhD that like, this is the direction I want to go, your advisor is less likely to put up a fight if you do seek that experience. If you're in a situation where there is a conflict, hopefully, you'll be in one where you can mine your advisor's connections or collaborate. It's a win-win, but I totally recognize that doesn't always happen. And not to bring in, the boys into this example or anything, but like my husband is a total industry guy, never wanted to be a professor. He's in kind of a sales role now as a PhD. He interned as an undergrad, but not during grad school because it wasn't something that people in his group really did. But he had the connections of people in his group who had gone on to found companies. And so, it was an easy interview coming out of grad school. So, if you keep your connections alive and if you have any kind of, engineering work experience at all, you don't necessarily have to have a summer internship like undergrad style to make it work.
Cool. Thanks. Definitely. Thanks, Suzanne. Like your information is very helpful. Yeah, I like to think about like the conflict. But like I will like hold until I have to do that, and I will keep do like networking. Thanks.
One thing I would also like to add, I back up Suzanne's point of postponing that conflict. There are some programs that will pair you with like an industry representative, and it's just a connection, and it's basically just to foster that you meet with them every so often, and maybe doing something like that where you can have like a close industry mentor, and it's supposed to basically help that connection and foster that relationship. Do you want to go into industry? This is my experience. These are my day-to-day tasks. You kind of have that point of contact. And it's like everyone mentioned, the networking aspect. So maybe it's not that company that person is in, but they have colleagues in other companies that they could introduce you to. And it's not necessarily securing an industry internship. You have that connection that's maybe a little bit more formal, and you're not stepping away from your graduate work and maybe delaying your graduation timeline.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, we have a question from Laura there in the chat. And it was kind of initiated there from Alyson's introduction, talking about the family friendliness of different positions. So she's curious, what the rest of you would say. And Alyson, if you want to add anything to that about your career's family friendliness and that work-life balance. Any of you?
I can add a little bit more. Speaking, I only have the one example for a national lab, and I found that that was family friendly. And then in industry, I would say it varies wildly. Two Fortune 50 tech companies, one with fantastic policies and work culture, is the perfect place to be for family friendliness. And another one without the culture and the policies would be the worst place to be. So I would say for industry, it's very company dependent.
And group dependent, because Alyson was talking about, she had changed jobs. So the question came in as work-life balance. I would call it work-life integration. So I have one child, they're in college now. So I'm back to, my husband and I are like, oh, we can do whatever we want now, as long as we're providing funds to keep them in college. And watching what has happened over time. So your first clue is, do they have a paternity policy? So the easiest one is to look at how liberal is their paternity policy, and when you're interviewing, how many of the men have taken it? Because that's group dependent. If you're in a group where the men do not take paternity leave, that's, you're always going to be the one who has to take leave. We don't do that. That's not very good. So regardless of their policies, do they actually go and take advantage of the policies? And when you have that both, and you think about it as integration, and to me, that's somewhat of a mindset of the men. They don't think of it as work-life balance. They think of it as, I'm the coach for my kids' softball team. So on Wednesdays, I have to leave at 4. And so they integrate that on their calendar, and everything moves around it. And so that was kind of what I did the same, is at the beginning of the school year, I'd put everything on my calendar, and I would view it like I've got a meeting with a customer. Those are meetings that I'm going to make happen. And then, there's still that trade-off, just like I can't make everything happen at work that I want to. There were things that I would miss at school. But I think that's part of the key is, do you see the behaviors you want to see out of the men that are in the group too? So they have to have the policies, and the men take advantage of it. And if they don't, then, and it does depend on the job. It's going to be hard to have a job that you work nights that you could say is family friendly,
Anne?
This was something that was really important to me as well. Even as, a person in my early 20s, collaborating with companies. For me, it was just, I don't have the physical stamina or the desire to be in the office all the time, throw it down or whatever. So for me, it was, is this a place that lets me set boundaries, with the job? And I always liked working in companies that were sort of old, established, boring, rather than companies that were new and exciting, because they did have more professionalism around these issues, and people who are in different life stages where they weren't interested in being in the office all the time. And so, something to look for, I guess, and this is, your generation is a lot more aware of this, I think, than ours was. But if everybody is zigging to the hot new startup, maybe you zag to the boring old company, because that's going to provide a more professional, stable, saner environment. The thing I would say about academic jobs is to be a little wary, actually. So a lot of people have the impression that, in a way, you're taking your foot off the gas of research, joining an institution like mine that doesn't have a PhD program, but you're teaching more hours. And so that actually means your schedule is less flexible in terms of being able to do X at Y time. I'm responsible for, not in COVID times, but in general, physically being in a certain place more than almost anybody with a PhD I know. Now I'm in a union, which is great, and that provides certain boundaries. It really empowers me to say no to people at work, which is, I'm a faculty member. It's one of my favorite things. No, I'm not going to do that. That's a good feeling. But in terms of just flexibility of schedule, be wary. A school that seems like it's lower on the food chain, maybe it'll be chill, probably means that your time is more rigidly scheduled than it might otherwise be.
Yeah, I would also like to say that it can be group dependent, even just at the graduate level. So I got married during graduate school, and similar to Alyson, my husband worked in San Antonio and I was going to school in Austin. And so we lived in the middle, which was like an hour commute each way, depending on traffic and things of that nature. And so, but luckily I had an advisor that was supportive of that and knew, and I adjusted my schedule to where I would come in really early and then leave by 4 o'clock, try to beat the traffic. And so even then, I mean, I hadn't started my career yet, but even during graduate school, that having balance was important, and travel time was important to me as well. So, and then now, as Suzanne said, your flexibility in academia varies. So I just started and I don't have any teaching responsibilities this semester. So my schedule is a lot more open. However, I think that can be a good and a bad thing, because in some ways, just because things aren't on your calendar doesn't mean that there aren't things to do. So I understand that it could also be a blessing and a curse for some. So I'm still learning how to navigate that freedom, but it's just something to know.
I think we try to figure out that work-life integration, lack of balance through our entire careers, and it's constant ebb and flow and adjust and figure it out for sure. Well, thank you all for sharing that. Riley asked, what's it like working in a national lab? And if she wants to work in a national lab, what kind of things could she do to get there?
Yeah, I can talk about that. Really quick though, I saw Suzanne also had the commute issue, the two. I feel like if one spouse has a PhD, the other spouse is likely going to be well educated or have a good career too, and you're going to find yourself in a position where you're going to end up doing weird commutes, or it doesn't ever work out perfectly where two people can find the perfect jobs and everyone only has to drive 15 minutes. That's something that's, I think, will apply to anyone that gets their PhD and chooses to have a spouse.
And so as another 2 PhD family in 2 different disciplines that were about as far apart, as you could get, we were lucky that we have always gotten to live together. So we started dating, we were babies. And so been married so long, I'm not going to say how long I've been married because everybody will fall out of their chair. That is the one thing, though, that when time came to interview, almost all my peers, when we were interviewing at the same time in the department, were all married to teachers and nurses. I have no idea what it was, but it was like my advisor had gone out and said, I only want to take on guys who are married to teachers or nurses. I was his first female. He forgot to ask what my husband did. And so when they were interviewing, they could interview anywhere because a nurse, PT, nurse, PT, or teacher, they could go anywhere. And so there were definitely cases where my husband and I chose not to even interview because we knew that the other option, it wasn't an hour commute, it would have been, 2 different states sort of thing. So there is limitations, but you will have to work harder at getting a job. In our case, we went to grad school. So we're trying to find a grad school, 2 different departments and both of us knew exactly what we wanted to do for our PhDs. And so we spent more time applying to grad school. We spent more time looking for jobs. And I think, even then you may be split shift, but sometimes if you're really lucky and you're graduating at the right time, we were able to live together, but we had to work much harder than our peers did on getting a job because we wanted to live together.
So I'm going to cut this part of the conversation off because we actually have our next webinar is actually on dual career STEM professionals.
Oh, okay.
Come back for that. We're going to talk we're going to dive deep into that one. So I want to make sure because we are almost at time. So I want to make sure we get through these questions. Yes.
Okay. Riley, if you want to type what field you're in, National Lab, I do recommend it. It's a lot like academia without having to teach classes too. It's very research based. There's only so many national labs and they're located in, specific areas of the country. So I would keep that in mind is, where do you want to live? And the way I think to try to get there, to help you get there, is at your next conference, whenever you're presenting your research, seek out the national lab that makes the most sense for your research area and go to the talks by people from that. Introduce yourself afterwards. Internship or some sort of research collaboration during grad school would be the best way to get there. So also ask your advisor what contacts they have at national labs.
Awesome. Okay, Odinaka, it's all you.
Thank you, Tricia. My question is, what techniques did you all use to go through grad school? I guess, what techniques did you all use to survive through masters and getting your PhD too? And I know Stephanie had mentioned that she already knew what she wanted to do when she was going into PhD, but for those who don't really have an idea, like how can they also work towards knowing what they can do to make the most times of their grad program?
Go to every seminar. I still find this amazing. I know there's not enough hours in the day, but the universities are really great about having people come in and talk, including from national labs, industry, other professors. And even as an undergrad, you do not have to be in grad school to go to those seminars. But when you're in grad school, you really should be going to the seminars, because you may hear someone speak and go, oh, that's what I want to do. And you now have met someone who's a full-time employee somewhere doing that thing that you're interested in. And so the one thing I love about Marissa, Alyson, and Suzanne is they've all been talking about the number of connections that they made as grad students. And I talked about being involved with the organizations. That is, all those connections are so available to you as a graduate student. You just have to take the effort to take advantage of them and see what clicks.
One of the
So Marissa,
huge, oh, sorry.
Well, I was so Marissa had mentioned a mentoring program. Was that through your university, or was that like through SWE or AICHE, or, what program was that?
It was through, it's not through UT Austin, or it's like an external application program that's for like biomedical sciences. It was advertised through the NIH. So I will look up the details and try to, honestly, they're just flyers posted around campus. That's how I knew of them. But yeah, I would attend all the WEP events. I think Tricia has been really helpful, and honestly, the WEP program kept my sanity during grad school, because research is really difficult, and dealing with advisors and conflicts at times can be really difficult, but it's nice to have an outlet on campus where you can just share your experiences and your time with other people, and they understand and willing to support you. And I think, although some of the events weren't really related to my field, it was just nice to meet other people and just ask them, oh, what do they do? And it was helpful to just meet a lot of other people, because even though it may not be directly related to me, I can meet someone else and say, oh, I met so-and-so and they're in this area, you should talk to them. And I would just recommend taking advantage of those types of opportunities when you're available. It can make for a busy schedule, but I think it's highly rewarding.
Suzanne?
Yeah, I think especially early on, when you're deciding what you might want to do, where you might want to go, who you might want to work with, it's important to be directed, like know what you like, know what you're interested in, but also be flexible. There's sort of a misconception that the best grad students are going to come to grad school like knowing exactly what they want their thesis to be. And that is, like, science is collaborative, right? So you want to be able to plug into something that a professor is working on. And the people who were that focused actually were kind of marginalized because they were off, by themselves and not in the mainstream of whatever their advisor was working on. So you kind of just keep notes of your likes and dislikes, right? And then as you look at schools, and especially once you get in, they just open the curtains and you can talk to whoever. And you really want to do that. And in particular, you want to be sure there's at least 3, hopefully more advisors you might be interested in working with once you land there, because you never know, like people leave, people retire. The guy I ended up working with didn't even join the faculty till my second year of grad school, just people were in and out. And you want to be sure that you'll be able to find a home and be a little flexible about what it is. The other thing is just that sometimes, and I'm a UT girl, y'all are too. Sometimes a big program is great because you only need like X number of friends, where that number is like 4 or 5 or whatever, right? And so the bigger the program is, the more likely there are going to be people that you click with. So UT is obviously huge. Stanford had a huge grad program, and so what that meant was just even if the percentages, of women or minorities or whatever was the same, there would be enough of us on the ground just because the program was huge, and especially if we all banded together, which we really kind of did. It was just really huge for, I think, everybody's survival. And I never regretted any time when I would just scoop people up and be like, hey, our advisor has this main project, but the 5 of us are all working on side projects. We should have our own meetings. Or like, hey, we're all kind of isolated in whatever way. We should get together once a week. And every time I did something like that, it was really important to like my success and survival in grad school. So just, never be afraid to bring your people together. And the bigger the school is, the more likely that there are your people, even if the percentages are the same as anywhere else.
Yeah, and just so everybody understands, I didn't have a dissertation topic. I had a broad topic area. And so one of the reasons with UT was there were several professors that were somehow related to that big topic area. So but I think flexibility is the key, because you never know how many slots are open or funding comes and goes, or they happen to go on the 1-year sabbatical the same time you need to be, picking your professors. So 10 years from now, the topic will change anyway. So
I'm gonna ask one last question, but I'm gonna challenge all of our panelists to maybe type the answer to one of these other questions in the chat. Lizeth asked about when you did your when in your undergrad career did you do a corporate intern, and when do you think this is most beneficial? And maybe you could answer that in the chat. And then I'm going to combine Jazz's question with my final question to you all, because I know we're past time and we always go late on these because the conversations are so good. So I'm going to ask you to answer Lizeth in the chat. And then my question to y'all from Jazz, and then my final question: what did you find the most challenging as part of your PhD? And with that, what's a piece of advice or something that you found most rewarding that we can inspire them all with? Who would like to start? They're all typing my answer.
I can go. Okay. The most challenging part for me was in the middle of my grad school. One time, the person I interviewed under, my advisor was retiring, a new person came in. I just got assigned to that advisor, and it wasn't a great match, but I kind of stuck with it, and that was hard. And then I also lost funding for a project at the national lab while I was there, and I had to find just a completely different project. And so my research papers were on anything that got published were in 2 very different separate areas. And somehow they still just let me have a PhD for that. So it wasn't even one cohesive thing. And that's fine too. So I felt like there was like constant bad things, but it all worked out. Like, you just keep doing it. And I had a group of friends that I was going through doing it with, and you all have Trisha that's amazing to reach out to find a way to keep going. And that gave me all the tenacity that helped in my career 10 years later. I mean, if I could do that, I can do anything. Oh, and I had to defend, sorry, this is just personal story. I defended a couple months before my wedding, but like the week of, my advisor asked for 1 million changes. And so even like after our rehearsal dinner, I had to go make changes to appease what he wanted, because otherwise I was going to have to register for classes in the summer, and then I would have to pay for classes. And anyway, it was all hard, but worth it in the end. Awesome. There was lots of hard parts, I guess.
Yeah, I feel, after listening to Alyson's story, I feel terrible because I don't have anything even remotely that awful. I had co-advisors, and my co-advisors actually got along really well. And how they did that is, on anything that needed to be done, they would say, he's the primary, whatever he says goes, and they would bounce that back and forth. And so what could have gone horribly wrong actually went really well. The biggest challenge is, at some point, you really will think the electrons hate you, because remember, I was doing plasmas, and you just get to the point that you really may hate the some aspect of the topic you're working on, if you're experimental or even if you're simulation. So I was experimental and my equipment started blowing up and had to be repaired, and doing that in a university environment. I had repaired equipment in industry and I assumed I know how to do this. And then you discover, no, it's very different when you're in an academic environment. And so that was really my biggest challenge. What kept me going was what everybody has been talking about: make connections, find your people, get involved in organizations, have a life. Because my husband and I were married. When we looked at universities, we actually asked every student we met what they did on the weekend. And then we ruled out immediately those schools where we had one school where the students kept on asking, I don't understand this question. They actually answered that. And we're in two different departments. So, we would meet up afterwards and go, okay, how'd it went? And they were like, they didn't understand what that question meant. It was like, right off that university. So that's the key. Have a life. Have your people, have things that you enjoy, and then pray like something happened to Alyson doesn't happen to you, but it might. In my case, it wasn't the professors that hated me, it was my equipment. Suzanne's laughing. She must have had equipment hating her too.
I think, it's a rite of passage.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said that is so right is, I was a baby when I went to grad school, and I was really jealous of the people who had work experience and came back, because the discipline that they applied to it, just people act like you have to work nonstop. And in some circumstances, maybe that's true for a limited time. But like, if you put in 8 hours a day, like it's a job, like grad school is completely unstructured, right? It's even worse than college. And so you can just really sink yourself. And there's a lot of mental health issues around that are well documented. But if you just go in and work 8 hours a day like it's a freaking job, you'll probably be better off than if you psych yourself out about how you should be working 8 hours a week and then don't. And I was in my head so much in grad school about I was kind of switching fields. Like I'm a CS professor now. And so a lot of sort of basic programming skills I was a little behind on coming from EE. So, oh my God, do I suck? Should I be here? Can I even do this? So just if I had just sat down and done my work and not been in my head, it would have been so much better. And I don't really know what you do about that, but this is a challenge we have as women, because people will be happy to get us in our head and psyching ourselves out if we're not already there on our own. But man, the more you can just sit down and do it like it's your job and not listen to what anybody says or what you think you should be doing, you'll have, a better, smoother, happier grad career, for sure.
And
I could tell a bunch of stories, but they all basically boil down to that.
And that was something we didn't do. My husband and I both wanted to get out of grad school as fast as possible. So we made grad school a whole lot more intense than it needed to be. So the professors want you to crank out stuff. I had a 400-page dissertation in 4 years. And so, yeah, look at Suzanne's face. Looking in hindsight, breathing would have probably been a good thing.
Marissa, what about you?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part for me, I went straight from my undergrad to graduate school. And I think in my head, I was very much like, I need to do whatever I'm asked to do because this was my peer, blah, blah. I mean, I felt like a kid when in reality I was an adult and I could say no, but I didn't think that I could. And so, in some aspects, I feel like some advisors can take advantage of that, knowing that you will say yes and you will kind of do whatever. And I think that, looking back, I wish that I would have said no in some cases, or I don't have the time for that, or that's too much. And it's funny because now my husband, when I finished grad school, he decided he wanted to get his PhD. So now he's in Dallas and I'm in San Antonio. And I get to now be the one that says, sure, I think maybe you should say yes to that, but say this needs to be removed. And so it's just funny now, I don't know, doing those things. But I wish I would have learned that I could say no and to not feel like I had to do everything. That would have been great. And it was really challenging at the time. But the most rewarding was, again, just undergraduate mentoring. And I mentored several UTWEP students, and seeing where they're now. Some are in industry, some are applying for graduate school, and just being a resource for them and seeing their careers prosper and start. It's just been really rewarding.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. What great conversations, what great questions that all of you had for our panelists. Thank you, Alyson, Suzanne, Stephanie, and Marissa for joining in today and sharing your stories and your struggles and your tips and advice. It was definitely, I think, helpful to all of our students participating.